tell you, it's always tough for a Democrat to drive anywhere that's Morse Boulevard. So if I was late, I ignored some of the signs. I couldn't look. I have to tell you, a few years ago, every time I came to the villages, people said it was a road game. Now as I look around the villages, I have to tell you, you are turning the villages very, very blue. Congratulations. I thought today for a few minutes we would talk about kind of where we are, how we got here, and where we're going. Where we are is that we have a challenge in Florida to do something we've not done since the days of Franklin Roosevelt, and that is, if we re-elect in Florida this president, we will have voted back-to-back for a Democrat in Florida for the first time in 7 very clear on it, and so there will be no question about it. We are going to elect Barack Obama President of the United States. There are those who are going to attack this president. They're going to have PACs and super duper PACs for all I know. And they will come up with everything they can to talk about this president. Well, let's talk about this president for a moment. President Barack Obama came into office and we were losing jobs at $700,000 a month. When President Obama and Vice President Biden took their oaths of office, from that day back to the day they were elected, we had lost 1.5 million jobs in the private sector in America. And we were losing jobs at an unprecedented rate, and we hadn't bottomed out. And what has been the response? The policy, it has been difficult, folks. These have been tough times on everyone. In the lifetime of most of us, and certainly in all of our adult lifetime, we had never seen the equity in homes vanish overnight. We had never seen the banks faltering on the precipice of collapse. We have had 27 consecutive months of economic growth during this presidency. For 7 months now, we've been growing. 7 of the last 8 months, we've been growing at the rate of 200,000 new jobs a year. We are going to gain possibly this year, the projection is somewhere between 2.5 and 3 million new jobs in the United States in the private sector. Now, how did that come about? Well, I'll give you one example. I'll give you 1 million jobs right up front. That was an example. The American automobile industry was at the door of collapse. The president said, I have the confidence in the American worker, in American management, in American ingenuity. I believe that this industry can not only survive, but can prosper and prevail. And we invested in this economy. And particularly we invested in the automobile industry. And what has it yielded? Folks, General Motors, from the precipice of collapse, is now the #1 seller in the world. Chrysler, which was about to join American Motors and Studebaker or something, and Henry J. Kaiser, as things we only remember in textbooks, Chrysler is back having the best sales they've had in 25 years. They're paying back. Both companies are paying back their debt. We're actually going to profit on the success. And almost every economist that studies it says that the net result has been 1 million American private sector manufacturing jobs were saved by this president's risk. And think if he hadn't taken that risk. Think if we had used the rationale of Governor Romney. Governor Romney said, let's just let him go into bankruptcy. And we'll just let him come out of bankruptcy. You know, on paper, that might work in a classroom, except that at the time this was going on, there were no banks willing to invest without the backing of the full faith and credit of the American people. And it was the full faith and credit of this president that saved us and put us back where we should be. And that's as the #1 car maker in the world again. You know, his successes have not only been in the economic sector. This president's also, I think, took on an enormous difficulty. He came in and we were in the midst of 2 wars. We were in the midst of 2 wars, one of which had been dragging on for some 8 years or 7 years, another which was approaching 6 or 7 years. I think all of us, no matter which side of the aisle we may be on from time to time, I know at Christmas time when I was going to see my wife and I were going to visit our grandchildren, and by the way, I know many of you have had grandchildren a while. I'm a new grandfather, having one 6 and 4, and if I had known about grandchildren, I would have skipped children. And I am convinced the only reason to maintain that parent-child relationship is that eventually they will produce more grandchildren. But we were going to see my son-in-law and daughter-in-law, and our 2 grandchildren in Germany, where he is stationed. He's a captain in the Army. And I couldn't help but feel every time I was at each airport how wonderful it was to see the groups of American soldiers, young men and women, coming home and knowing they were not going back to Iraq. What a wonderful wholeheartedly endorse this president's proposal, and that is, as soon as it is so that we can make the community as safe as possible, we're going to pull out of Afghanistan and allow Afghanistan to become this country. And I guess it would be wrong to not also recall that when this president took office, Al-Qaeda was fighting us throughout the world. Now, I guess there was the question, I think, that the Republicans McCain kept raising about this president and his ability to handle those kinds of tough decisions. Well, let's just talk about it. I think 21 of the top 23 Al-Qaeda leaders in the world at the time this president took over are either in captivity or dead. And by the way, one of them is bin Laden. If you really want to summarize why he earns re-election, and you're going to have to be in a crowd and speak in a hurry, you can tell them this much. You can say, well, if you want a bumper sticker, it ought to be this. Bin Laden is dead and General Motors hiring. That's what this president has done. So we've made the case of why he deserves to be re-elected. The economic policy, by the way, of Romney, who's going to be their nominee, which we share one thing in the Republicans. We're not excited about it either. His economic policy is exactly the economic policy, almost to the word, that got us into this mess to start with. They cannot rid themselves of the thought that if we have a few people at the top who are doing very, very well, it will eventually flow down and float up the rest of the boat. What we've actually seen is that if we allow a few people at the top to get enormously well, and nobody in this country, we love success stories in this country. We love them in our own families. We love Americans aren't anti-success. But what we do understand is that we are also a middle class. What we have been the envy of the world because of the great middle class we've produced. And what we've known is every time we have succumbed to this idea that we will allow all of the wealth to flow upward, it stays upward and doesn't move downward. And that's not good for the American economy nor the American life. Choices are really simple. Do you want to go back to what got us into this? Already they're saying, we don't want any regulation of business. That's what the problem is with regulation. Ladies and gentlemen, we got here because we didn't regulate. We fell asleep at the wheel. And Americans have lost the values of their homes, the values of their businesses, and shut down small business throughout this country because we didn't pay attention to the sound economic things that we know have to happen in terms of regulation. We know that risk was out here that was way beyond what should have been allowed. And we're paying the price for it every day now. So this is a battle of really two ideas. One, which is the tell you, I don't think, despite what the Tea Party rallies say, I don't think this country wants to go back to the days of Bush because we know where it ended up. And Romney's plan is identical. On foreign affairs, I love this thing. This guy gets up and he says, if I am the president, Iran will not have a nuclear weapon. That's what Romney said. But you can't get him to tell you what he would do differently. Can't get him to tell you what he would do differently. Except he said, I wouldn't apologize. Apologize to Iran for what? What are you going to do? What is he going to do? It is so easy to be in his position. If I were there. It reminds me of when years ago, and some of you can remember it, Richard Nixon had a secret plan to get us out of Vietnam. 7 years later, we got the secret. We're getting out. We're hovering, I didn't see where we finished yet. We're somewhere between 12.5 and 13. I think we've been up about 13.3, somewhere in that range. We're hovering there. All of the reports that are coming. You know, Wall Street seems unhappy with the president. Have you seen the reports of how well they're doing? Well, the market is responding, and it looks like we're ready for a bull market. When the president took over, it was what, 67? 6,700? If a Republican had been the President of the United States and the markets had recovered by something like that, he would be considered the greatest Republican in Ronald Reagan. They cannot give this president credit at any stage for anything he's done, but the American people will. But the real reason that we're Democrats is because there is a difference. It's not always easy to define, but it's really one that Mario Cuomo most defined in my mind. He talked about, at the National Convention, he talked about the two wagon trains, if you will, of this nation. Both of which start in the east and traverse to the west because that's how our nation grew to its prosperity and to its fullness. And he said there is one wagon train and it departs. And it starts out with a lot of people. But along the way, when they hit the tough parts of the desert, they have to leave some people behind. They may be older, they may be less able, they may be not of sufficient means, but they have to jettison some folks. And when they get to the mountains, which are the last great tug to get to the other side, again, they have to jettison and leave behind some people who just can't make the trip. When they get there, the finest of the fittest will have made it. That's the Republicans. There is another wagon train, and it is the train that is the Democratic wagon train. And when it leaves and hits the desert, some of us, like myself, who've been so blessed in my life, a dad who didn't get but 1 month of the 11th grade, who worked himself to death to give me his dream, we feel like maybe we get out of our wagon and we'll walk beside it for a while so that some other folks need to get help to make it. And when we get to the mountain,